Thanks for joining us tonight. We'd love to know where you're listening from and who you're sharing this moment with. Drop a comment below. If you enjoy a good scare before bed, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more nightly chills. Now, settle in, dim the lights, and let the story begin. I've always been a hopeless romantic, drawn to the idea of a love so powerful it could transcend time and space. Maybe that's why I was so taken with him. But what I didn't realize, what none of us realized, was that this love would be the undoing of so many lives. It all started when I moved to a small, sleepy village tucked away in the mountains. The village, Hemlock Hollow, was charming in an old-world way. It had cobblestone streets, ivy-covered cottages, and a sense of isolation that was both comforting and unnerving. The people were kind, albeit a bit wary of outsiders. They spoke in hushed tones about the village's history, hinting at old curses and dark legends, but I paid them no mind. I was too busy settling into my new life. It was during one of my solitary walks through the woods that I first saw him. He was tall, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to see right through me. His presence was magnetic, and I felt drawn to him in a way that defied logic. He introduced himself as Gabriel, and from that moment on, I was lost. Gabriel had a mysterious air about him. He would appear and disappear with no warning, and whenever I asked about his past, he would deflect with a charming smile and a cryptic answer. But I didn't care. I was captivated by him, and as our relationship deepened, I found myself falling more and more in love. The villagers, however, were less enamored with Gabriel. They would look at him with suspicion, crossing themselves as he passed by. I didn't understand their fear until the disappearances began. It started with the animals. Pets and livestock would go missing overnight, their bodies never found. Then, it was the people. First, it was old Mr. Wilkins, the town blacksmith. Then, Mrs. Harper, who ran the bakery. One by one, the villagers began to vanish, leaving behind nothing but a lingering sense of dread. The rumors spread quickly. Whispers of a monster in the woods, a creature that could change its shape at will. They called it the shapeshifter, an ancient being that fed on the souls of the living, taking their forms to lure in its next victim. The stories were terrifying, but I refused to believe them. I refused to believe that Gabriel, the man I loved, could be this monster. But doubt began to creep in. Gabriel's behavior became more erratic. He would disappear for days at a time, returning with strange, dark bruises on his skin and a haunted look in his eyes. When I confronted him, he would brush it off, telling me not to worry. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Then, one night, everything changed. I was alone in my cottage, waiting for Gabriel to return, when I heard a knock at the door. My heart leaped, hoping it was him. But when I opened the door, I found a figure standing in the shadows, their face obscured by the darkness. "Emma," the figure whispered, its voice soft and familiar. It was Gabriel, or at least it looked like Gabriel. But there was something off about him. His eyes were too dark, his smile too wide. And then I saw it, the flicker of movement beneath his skin, as if something was shifting and writhing just beneath the surface. "Gabriel?" I asked, my voice trembling. He stepped forward, his smile widening. "Come with me, Emma. Let's leave this place. We can be together forever." But as he spoke, his voice began to change. It became deeper, more guttural, and his features began to twist and contort. The handsome face I knew so well melted away, revealing something monstrous and inhuman. His skin turned pale and leathery, his eyes black as coal, and his mouth stretched into a grotesque grin filled with sharp, jagged teeth. I screamed, stumbling backward as the creature lunged at me. I slammed the door shut, locking it just in time, and backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. Through the door, I could hear the creature's laughter, a low, menacing sound that chilled me to the bone. For the first time, I realized the truth. Gabriel was the shapeshifter, the monster that had been terrorizing the village, and I had fallen in love with him. The next few days were a blur of fear and confusion. I didn't know what to do or who to trust. I was terrified to leave my cottage, knowing that the shapeshifter could be anyone except Gabriel. He was gone, replaced by the creature that had taken his form. But the shapeshifter wasn't done with me. Every night it would come to my door, taking the form of someone I knew, Mrs. Harper, Mr. Wilkins, even my own mother. It would whisper to me, begging me to let it in, promising that everything would be all right if I just opened the door. But I knew better. I knew that if I let it in, I would never see the light of day again. The nights grew longer, the darkness more suffocating. I barely slept, my mind consumed with fear. I knew I couldn't stay in the village. I had to leave, but the thought of facing the shapeshifter on my own terrified me. Then, one night, the creature played its final card. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard a voice that made my blood run cold. "Emma," it whispered, soft and pleading. It was Gabriel's voice, but I knew it couldn't be him. It was just another one of the shapeshifter's tricks. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the sound. "Emma, please," the voice continued, filled with sorrow. "I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. Please, let me in. I need you." I felt a tear slip down my cheek. It sounded so real, so genuine. But I couldn't let myself be fooled again. I couldn't let the creature in. "Emma," the voice whispered again, more urgently. "I love you." Something inside me broke. I couldn't take it anymore. I jumped out of bed and ran to the door, flinging it open. But what I saw on the other side was not Gabriel. It was the shapeshifter, grinning at me with its twisted, monstrous face. Its eyes gleamed with malice, and its mouth stretched into a smile that was all teeth. "Gotcha," it hissed, lunging at me. I screamed and slammed the door shut, locking it just in time. The creature pounded on the door, its laughter echoing through the night. "Run, Emma," it taunted. "Run as far as you can, but you can't escape me. I'll find you. I'll always find you." I didn't wait to hear more. I grabbed a bag and stuffed it with whatever I could find: clothes, food, a flashlight, and bolted out the back door. I ran through the woods, not caring where I was going, just needing to get away. The branches scratched at my skin, the darkness pressing in around me, but I didn't stop. Eventually, I made it to the edge of the village. I could see the lights of the houses in the distance, the safety they promised. But as I took a step forward, I heard a voice behind me, a voice that made my heart stop. "Emma," it called, soft and familiar. "Don't leave me." I turned, and there he was, Gabriel, standing in the shadows, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Please, Emma," he whispered. "I'm sorry. I love you." But I knew better. I knew it wasn't him. I turned and ran, not stopping until I was miles away from the village. I don't know how long I've been running, or how far I've gone. The days blur together, the nights filled with nightmares. But I can't stop. I can't rest. Because I know the shapeshifter is still out there, hunting me, waiting for the moment when I let my guard down. And when it finds me, I know it will be the last thing I ever see. Get ready for the next story that will send chills down your spine. The house was the kind you'd see in old horror movies, a sprawling Victorian mansion with turrets and tall, narrow windows. My wife, Emma, and I had bought it for a steal, a deal too good to pass up. It was a fixer-upper, but we were ready for the challenge. We'd always dreamed of renovating an old house, breathing life back into its crumbling walls. We imagined it as a place to start our family, fill it with memories and maybe, if we were lucky, some of the ghosts of the past. It wasn't long after we moved in that strange things started to happen. At first it was small, almost unnoticeable. A cold draft that seemed to follow us from room to room. Objects going missing only to turn up in odd places, and the sound of footsteps in the attic above our bedroom late at night. We laughed it off, chalking it up to the quirks of an old house. But the laughter faded when the dreams started. They began as hazy, disjointed images. A woman in a white dress standing at the foot of our bed, her eyes sad and distant. She would whisper my name, her voice soft and lilting like a song on the wind. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the echo of her voice lingering in the darkness. Emma told me she was having the same dreams, but we didn't talk about it much. It felt too real, too strange, like we were sharing the same nightmare. One night, the dream changed. The woman in white was standing closer this time, her face clearer than before. Her beauty was otherworldly, with pale skin that seemed to glow in the moonlight and long dark hair that framed her delicate features. But there was something wrong with her eyes. They were too dark, too deep, like bottomless pits that threatened to swallow me whole. She smiled at me, a slow, eerie smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "You must help me," she whispered, her voice echoing in my mind. "Set me free." I woke up gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. Emma was already awake, sitting up in bed with a terrified look on her face. "She was here," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "She was right here, next to me." We spent the rest of the night in the living room, too afraid to go back to sleep. The next morning, we decided to investigate the attic. The door to the attic was at the end of a long hallway, hidden behind an old tapestry. The stairs creaked as we climbed, the air growing colder with each step. The attic was a large, dusty space filled with old furniture, boxes of forgotten belongings, and the smell of mildew. The light was dim, filtering through the dirty, cracked windows. We found an old trunk pushed up against the far wall, its lock rusted and broken. Inside, we discovered a collection of letters, all addressed to someone named Eliza. The handwriting was elegant, the paper yellowed with age. The letters spoke of a woman who had lived in the house over 100 years ago. a woman accused of witchcraft. According to the letters, Eliza was a healer, a woman who could cure the sick and ease the suffering. But her talents made the villagers uneasy, and rumors began to spread. They called her a witch, said she had made a pact with the devil himself. One letter stood out from the rest. It was a confession, written by a man named Thomas, who claimed to have loved Eliza. In the letter, Thomas admitted to betraying her, leading the villagers to her door on a cold winter's night. They dragged her from her home, her cries echoing through the night, and burned her at the stake. But as the flames consumed her, Eliza swore vengeance on all who had wronged her, promising to return and exact her revenge. Emma and I sat in stunned silence, the weight of the story pressing down on us. The woman in our dreams was Eliza, and she was angry. We tried to leave the house that day, to get away from whatever force was haunting us, but the house wouldn't let us go. The doors wouldn't open, the windows were sealed shut, and the phone lines were dead. We were trapped. That night, the dreams returned, but they were different. Eliza wasn't just a ghost. She was something else, something darker. Her eyes glowed with a malevolent light, her voice no longer soft and lilting, but harsh and filled with anger. "You cannot escape me," she hissed. "You will pay for what was done to me." The next few days were a blur. The house seemed to come alive, its walls closing in on us, the air thick with the scent of burning wood. The footsteps in the attic grew louder, more frantic, as if something was trying to break through the floorboards. Emma was the first to see her. She was standing in the kitchen, making tea, when she felt a cold hand on her shoulder. She turned, expecting to see me, but instead, she saw Eliza standing behind her, her face twisted in a cruel smile. "Help me," Eliza whispered, her voice like nails on a chalkboard. Emma screamed, dropping the teapot, and ran to me. But when I looked, there was no one there. We tried to find a way to appease her, to break whatever curse was holding her here, but nothing worked. Every time we thought we had found a solution, Eliza would appear, laughing at our attempts. One night, as we sat in the living room, exhausted and terrified, the lights flickered, and the room grew cold. Eliza appeared before us, her eyes burning with hatred. "You will never leave this place," she said, her voice echoing through the room. "You are mine now." Before we could react, the room went dark, and I felt a sharp pain in my chest. I gasped, clutching at my heart, but it was too late. The last thing I saw was Eliza's face, her eyes filled with a terrible, twisted joy. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor, my body numb with cold. Emma was next to me, her face pale and lifeless. I tried to move, to reach for her, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed. Eliza stood over us, her smile wicked and triumphant. "You thought you could escape me?" she sneered. "Foolish mortals, you are mine now, forever." The last thing I heard before the darkness claimed me was Eliza's laughter, echoing through the house. We were never found. The house still stands, empty and abandoned, a dark shadow on the edge of the town. They say that if you listen closely, you can still hear Eliza's laughter, a reminder that she is still there, waiting for her next victims. And if you ever find yourself standing before that old decaying mansion, turn back. Because the angel in the attic is no angel at all. She's a witch. and she's always hungry for more souls. It's time for the third story of the night. The small town of Raven's Hollow had always been shrouded in mystery. It was a place where secrets festered beneath the surface, whispered only in hushed tones and behind closed doors. And at the center of it all was Father Marcus, the beloved priest of St. Jude's Church. To the townspeople, Father Marcus was a beacon of hope, a man of God who had devoted his life to serving others. His sermons were powerful, his presence comforting, and his eyes, well, there was something unsettling about his eyes. But no one dared question him. After all, who would suspect a priest of anything but good? I had been assigned to Raven's Hollow as a journalist, tasked with investigating the strange occurrences that had plagued the town for years. Disappearances, bloodless animals, and the inexplicable fear that clung to the place like a fog. It didn't take long before I found myself drawn to Father Marcus. He seemed to know everything, to be involved in every aspect of the town's life. And yet, there was something off about him. Something that made my skin crawl every time he looked at me. One night, after weeks of fruitless investigations, I decided to visit St. Jude's. It was late, too late for anyone to be out, but I had a feeling, a gnawing suspicion that wouldn't let me rest until I found out the truth. The church stood at the edge of town, a towering Gothic structure that loomed over the surrounding trees. Its stone walls were cold, unwelcoming, and the shadows that danced along the facade seemed to move with a life of their own. I hesitated at the entrance, my hand trembling as I reached for the heavy wooden door. But I couldn't turn back now. I needed to know. I needed to find out what Father Marcus was hiding. As I pushed the door open, the hinges creaked loudly, the sound echoing through the empty nave. The air inside was cold, unnaturally so, and the dim light from the few candles still burning cast long, flickering shadows across the pews. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The church was silent, save for the faint rustling of the wind outside. I walked slowly down the aisle, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet, and as I approached the altar, I saw him. Father Marcus was kneeling in prayer, his back to me, his head bowed low. He was whispering something. Words I couldn't quite make out, but they sent a chill down my spine. It was a language I didn't recognize, guttural and harsh, nothing like the Latin I had expected. I froze, my instincts screaming at me to leave, to run. But I couldn't move, couldn't tear my eyes away from him. And then, without warning, he stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, oppressive, as if the very air had been sucked out of the room. Slowly, Father Marcus rose to his feet, his movements unnervingly fluid, almost inhuman. He turned to face me, and I felt my blood run cold. His eyes, they weren't the eyes of a man. They were black, soulless pits that seemed to swallow the light around them. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his lips were curled into a smile that revealed sharp, elongated teeth. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice smooth, almost hypnotic. "This is a place of worship, and you are trespassing." I took a step back, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "What are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" He chuckled, a low, sinister sound that made my heart skip a beat. "Isn't it obvious?" he asked. taking a step towards me. I am the shepherd, tending to my flock. His words sent a wave of nausea through me. The truth was staring me in the face, but I couldn't. No, I didn't want to believe it. But as he moved closer, the smell of death and decay filled my nostrils, and I knew. Father Marcus was a vampire. Panic surged through me, and I turned to run, but he was faster. In an instant, he was in front of me, his hand gripping my arm with an iron strength that sent pain shooting up to my shoulder. "Leaving so soon?" he whispered, his breath cold against my skin. "I thought you came here for answers." I struggled, my mind racing for a way out, but his grip was unbreakable. His eyes bore into mine, and I felt a strange, overwhelming urge to give in, to let him take me. But I wouldn't let that happen. With all the strength I could muster, I shoved him back, breaking free of his hold. I ran towards the door, my heart pounding in my ears, but as I reached it, the lights in the church flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. For a moment, I was frozen with fear. I could hear his footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate, the sound reverberating in the silence. I fumbled for the door handle, my hands shaking, but it wouldn't budge. Suddenly, a hand shot out of the darkness, grabbing my shoulder and spinning me around. I came face to face with him, his fangs glinting in the faint moonlight that filtered through the stained glass windows. "Do you really think you can escape?" he asked, his voice dripping with malice. "You're mine now." His grip tightened, and I felt his breath on my neck, the sharp tips of his fangs grazing my skin. I closed my eyes, bracing for the pain, for the end. But then, something unexpected happened. The church bells tolled, their deep, resonant chimes echoing through the night. Father Marcus recoiled, his face contorting in pain as the sound pierced the air. I took my chance, shoving him away and darting towards the altar. There, on the wall, was a large, ornate crucifix. I grabbed it, holding it out in front of me like a shield. The vampire hissed, his eyes narrowing as he backed away, his skin blistering where the light of the crucifix touched it. "You think that will save you?" he snarled, his voice laced with fury. "This is my domain, and you are nothing but prey." But I wasn't going to give up. I kept the crucifix between us, slowly inching my way towards the door. I could see the rage in his eyes, the hunger, but he couldn't come any closer. As I reached the door, I heard him laugh, a cold, cruel sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You may leave tonight," he said, his voice echoing in the darkness. "But know this, you will never be free. I will always be watching, waiting, and when you least expect it, I will come for you." I didn't wait to hear more. I flung the door open and ran out into the night, the cold air hitting me like a slap in the face. I didn't stop running until I was far from the church, far from the nightmare that had almost claimed me. But even now, as I write this, I can feel his presence, lurking just beyond the edge of my awareness. I know he's out there, waiting for his next move, waiting for the moment when I let my guard down. Because Father Marcus isn't just a priest, he's a monster, and he will never stop hunting me. Get ready for the next story. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video. Your support helps me create more of these stories for you to enjoy. Thanks for watching. It was the kind of night that makes you question why you're still awake. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, each passing second a reminder that sleep had become a distant, unreachable goal. The rain outside had picked up, tapping against the window with a persistent rhythm that echoed in the quiet house. I was alone, every creak and groan of the old place amplified in the stillness. I had been working late, another night spent catching up on endless paperwork that seemed to multiply by the day. My eyes ached from staring at the screen for too long, and my head throbbed with the dull pain of exhaustion. I decided it was time for a break, to clear my mind before the words on the page started to blur together again. I stood up and stretched, my joints popping in protest. The house was dark, the only light coming from the dim lamp on my desk. I glanced out the window, more out of habit than anything else, expecting to see nothing but the usual empty street, washed in the yellow glow of the streetlights. But tonight, something was different. At the far end of the street, standing under the flickering street lamp, was a figure. A tall, gaunt man, dressed in a clown suit, with a painted-on smile that stretched too wide, too unnaturally. His clothes were worn, tattered in places, and his face was hidden behind layers of cracked white makeup. In one hand, he held a single red balloon, the string dangling lazily in the breeze. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at him, a cold dread settling in the pit of my stomach. There was something deeply wrong about him, something that sent a shiver down my spine. The way he stood there, perfectly still, as if he had all the time in the world. The way his eyes, dark and sunken, seemed to be looking straight through the glass, straight at me. I told myself it was just a prank, some idiot trying to scare people for a laugh, but there was nothing funny about the way he stared, unblinking, unwavering, like he was waiting for something, waiting for me. I stepped back from the window, my heart racing. The room suddenly felt too small, too suffocating. I closed the curtains, shutting out the night and the unsettling figure that lurked within it. But the image of that clown, with his eerie grin and his silent balloon, was burned into my mind. I tried to shake it off, tried to convince myself that it was nothing, that I was just overtired and seeing things. But no matter how hard I tried to focus on my worry, my thoughts kept drifting back to that clown. What was he doing out there? And why had he been staring at my house? The minutes dragged on, each one more torturous than the last. I found myself glancing at the curtains, half expecting to see his silhouette standing there just outside. The rational part of me knew it was impossible, that I was letting my imagination run wild. But the fear was real, gnawing at me, growing with every passing second. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to see if he was still there, if he was even real. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the curtain, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. And then, with a deep breath, I pulled the curtain back, just enough to peek through. The street was empty. The clown was gone. I let out a shaky breath, relief washing over me. Maybe it had been a prank, or maybe I'd just imagined the whole thing. Either way, it didn't matter. He was gone, and I could finally put the whole unsettling encounter behind me. But then, something caught my eye. A flash of color, bright against the wet pavement. I looked down, my heart skipping a beat. The red balloon. It was tied to the fence outside my house, swaying gently in the breeze. Panic gripped me. my mind racing. He had been here, right outside my home. How had I not heard him? How long had he been standing there, just out of sight? And more importantly, where was he now? I backed away from the window, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. My phone was on the desk, but the thought of calling someone, of trying to explain what was happening, seemed impossible. What would I say? That a clown had been standing outside my house in the middle of the night? It sounded insane, even to me. But there was nothing sane about this night. Nothing sane about the way that balloon was tied so perfectly, so deliberately, to my fence. I needed to do something. I couldn't just stand there waiting for whatever was going to happen next. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police, my hands trembling as I tried to keep my voice steady. I told them about the clown, about the balloon, about how I was alone and scared and didn't know what to do. They assured me they would send someone to check it out, told me to stay inside and lock the doors. I hadn't even thought of that. My mind was so clouded with fear that I hadn't done the most basic thing to protect myself. I rushed to the front door, bolting it shut, then went to check the back. But as I approached the kitchen, I heard a sound that stopped me in my tracks, a soft, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from the back door. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The tapping continued, steady and deliberate, like someone was knocking, not with their fist, but with something hard, something metallic. I didn't want to look, didn't want to see what was out there, but I had to. I inched closer, every step feeling like it took an eternity. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, as if whoever or whatever was on the other side knew I was approaching. Finally, I reached the door. My hand shook as I gripped the handle, and I slowly, so slowly, pulled back the curtain. He was there. The clown, his face inches from the glass, his eyes locked on mine. He was tapping the window with the end of a long, rusted knife, the blade stained dark with something I didn't want to think about. His grin was wider now, impossibly wide, stretching from ear to ear, his teeth sharp and jagged. I screamed, stumbling back, dropping the curtain in my panic. I ran, tripping over my own feet, crashing into furniture as I fled to the front of the house. I grabbed my keys, fumbling with the lock, desperate to get out, to escape. But my hands were shaking too much. I could hear him at the back door, the sound of the knife scraping against the glass, the low, guttural laugh that sent chills down my spine. Finally, I managed to unlock the door and threw it open. I ran outside, the cold night air hitting me like a slap in the face. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I just ran, my feet pounding the pavement, my heart racing as I sprinted down the empty street. But as I ran, I heard something behind me, the sound of footsteps, quick and light, keeping pace with me. I glanced over my shoulder, my blood turning to ice. He was following me. The clown, his knife gleaming in the dim light, his grin still plastered across his face, was running after me, closing the distance with every step. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let him catch me. I turned a corner, my shoes slipping on the wet pavement, and there, in the distance, I saw the flashing lights of a police car. Hope surged through me, giving me the strength to keep going. I waved my arms, screaming for help, and the car sped towards me, its siren piercing the night. But just as the car reached me, Just as the officer stepped out to help, I heard a soft pop behind me. I turned, and there it was, a red balloon floating up into the sky, the string tied to a fence post, the same way the last one had been. The clown was gone. The officer looked at me, confusion and concern written all over his face as I tried to explain what had happened. But even as I spoke, I knew it didn't matter. He was gone, and no one would believe me. The clown had disappeared into the night, leaving nothing behind but a trail of fear and a red balloon. But I knew, deep down, that he wasn't gone for good. He was out there, somewhere, waiting for his next victim. And someday, he'd be back. Get ready for the next story that will send chills down your spine. Hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed the story. Your support means the world and keeps these thrilling tales coming. Thanks for being a part of our community. I had always been an adventurer at heart, drawn to the wild places that others feared. There was something about the solitude, the raw beauty of nature, that called to me like nothing else. So, when I found myself with a rare weekend off work, I decided to head out on a solo hike in the remote wilderness of the Adirondack Mountains. It was a place I'd explored many times before, but never alone. I told myself that this time would be different. This time it would be a journey of self-discovery, a chance to connect with nature on a deeper level. I packed my gear, double-checked my supplies, and set out early in the morning. The air was crisp, the sky clear. It was the perfect day for a hike. The trail I chose was one less traveled, winding through dense forests, past hidden waterfalls, and up to a ridge that offered breathtaking views of the surrounding peaks. The hours passed in a peaceful blur as I lost myself in the rhythm of the trail, the steady crunch of leaves underfoot, the distant call of birds, the gentle rustle of the wind through the trees. By the time I reached the ridge, the sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows across the landscape. I stood there for a moment, taking in the view, feeling a deep sense of contentment. This was what I lived for, these moments of pure, unfiltered beauty, where the worries of the world seemed to melt away. But then, as I turned to begin my descent back down the trail, I felt something give way beneath my foot. There was a sudden, sharp snap, followed by an excruciating pain shooting up my leg. I screamed, the sound echoing off the mountains, and looked down to see a rusted bear trap clamped tightly around my ankle. Panic surged through me as I tried to free myself, but the more I struggled, the deeper the metal teeth bit into my flesh. Blood was already seeping through my pants, staining the ground beneath me. I realized with a sickening dread that I was alone, miles from the nearest road, with no one to hear my cries for help. I forced myself to take a deep breath, to think rationally. My backpack was within reach, and I managed to drag it toward me. I fumbled through the contents, my hands trembling, searching for something, anything that could help. My phone was there, but there was no signal. Of course, there wasn't. I was in the middle of nowhere. I had a small first aid kit, but it was laughably inadequate for the situation. A few bandages, some antiseptic wipes, nothing that would help me escape this hellish trap. I tried to use my multi-tool to pry the jaws open, but the mechanism was old, rusted, and jammed tight. Every movement sent fresh waves of agony through my leg. Hours passed as I fought to free myself, the sun sinking lower and lower in the sky. The shadows grew longer, darker, until they seemed to swallow the forest whole. The temperature dropped rapidly, the warmth of the day giving way to the biting cold of the night. My breath came in ragged gasps, the pain and fear threatening to overwhelm me. And then, just as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A soft rustling in the underbrush, the sound of footsteps approaching. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to see through the gathering darkness, but all I could make out were shadows moving among the trees. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Is someone there? Please, I need help." For a moment, there was silence. Then, a figure stepped out from the shadows, a man dressed in tattered clothes, his face obscured by the hood of his jacket. He stopped a few feet away from me, staring down at the trap with an expression I couldn't read. "Please," I begged. "I'm trapped. Can you help me?" The man didn't respond. Instead, he crouched down beside me, his movements slow and deliberate. I caught a glimpse of his face beneath the hood. Hollow eyes, skin weathered by the elements, a thin, cruel smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "Looks like you've found yourself in a bit of a predicament," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Please, you have to help me," I repeated, my desperation mounting. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the metal jaws of the trap, but instead of trying to open it, he tightened it, sending a fresh wave of pain through my leg. I screamed, tears streaming down my face. "Why? Why are you doing this?" I gasped. The man stood up, his smile widening. "You see, these woods, they don't take kindly to strangers. Folks like you coming out here, thinking you own the place. You don't belong here. This is our land." I stared at him in horror as the realization dawned on me. This wasn't just some random encounter. This man, whoever he was, had set the trap, had been waiting for someone like me to fall into it. He leaned in closer, his breath hot against my face. "And now that we've caught you, we're gonna have a little fun." My heart raced as I tried to comprehend what he was saying, but before I could react, he stepped back and whistled sharply. The sound echoed through the trees, and from the darkness more figures emerged, men and women, all dressed in ragged clothes, their faces twisted with malice. They surrounded me, their eyes gleaming with a sick, predatory hunger. I tried to fight, to crawl away, but the trap held me fast. They laughed, a cold, cruel sound that filled the night air and began to taunt me, their voices blending together into a cacophony of horror. "Please, let me go," I sobbed, but they only laughed harder. The man who had first approached me knelt down again, his hand gripping my chin, forcing me to look into his eyes. "We're gonna play a little game," he whispered. "It's called Who'll Survive Until Sunrise." With that, they began to torture me, taking turns inflicting pain, their faces contorted with glee as they watched me writhe and scream. The night stretched on, the darkness seeming to close in around me, suffocating me in its inky blackness. But then, just as I was about to lose consciousness, something changed. The wind shifted, carrying with it a low, guttural growl that silenced the laughter of my tormentors. They froze, their eyes darting around the forest, their expressions suddenly fearful. The man released me, standing up slowly, his gaze fixed on something in the distance. "It's coming," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "What is?" one of the others asked, their voice trembling. "The beast," he replied, his eyes wide with terror. "We need to go now." But it was too late. From the shadows, a massive shape emerged, its eyes glowing in the darkness, its breath steaming in the cold night air. It moved with terrifying speed, a blur of fur and fangs, and before I could even comprehend what was happening, it was upon them. The men and women who had tortured me only moments before now screamed in terror as they were torn apart, their blood staining the ground red. I watched in stunned silence, too weak to move, too horrified to look away. The beast, it was like nothing I'd ever seen before, a creature of nightmares, half bear, half wolf, with eyes that burned like embers and claws that could rend flesh from bone. It moved through them with a savage grace, killing with a precision that was almost mesmerizing. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. The bodies of my tormentors lay scattered around me, their faces frozen in expressions of pure terror. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sound the ragged gasps of my own breath. I was alive, but just barely. My leg throbbed with pain, my body trembling from shock and exhaustion. I knew I had to get out of there, had to find help, but I was too weak, too broken. As I lay there, staring up at the stars that now dotted the night sky, I realized that I was no longer alone. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, watching me. It was the beast, its eyes glowing softly in the darkness. But this time there was no malice in its gaze, no hunger. It simply stood there, watching me with an almost sympathetic expression. And then, as if sensing my thoughts, it turned and disappeared into the woods, leaving me alone once more. I don't know how long I lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness. Time seemed to lose all meaning as the night dragged on, the cold seeping into my bones. But eventually, the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, and with it came a renewed sense of hope. I was alive. I had survived the night. It wasn't until hours later, when a group of hikers found me and called for help, that I was finally freed from the trap. They took me to the hospital, where I was treated for my injuries, but the scars, both physical and mental, would remain with me forever. The police investigated the incident, but they never found any trace of the people who had attacked me, nor any sign of the beast that had saved me. The forest. We've made it to the last story of the night. This final tale is the scariest one yet, guaranteed to give you chills. The Cursed Doll, a tale of family and fear. I stood in the dimly lit basement, staring at the old wooden chest that lay hidden beneath a dusty cloth. The chest was small and unassuming, but I knew better. Inside it was a relic of my childhood, a relic I had spent years trying to forget. The air was thick with the scent of mildew, and the single bulb overhead cast eerie shadows on the walls. I could hear the faint hum of the house settling, the creak of the floorboards above, but my focus remained on that chest. It had been years since I'd last opened it. Years since I'd last laid eyes on the doll that had once been my closest companion and my darkest nightmare. A shiver ran down my spine as the old fear began to creep back into my heart. "Mom?" The voice of my daughter, Emily, pulled me back to the present. I turned to see her standing at the top of the basement stairs, her big blue eyes filled with curiosity. Emily was the spitting image of me at her age. Blonde hair, delicate features, and a wide-eyed innocence that made my heart ache with love and protectiveness. "Yes, sweetheart," I replied, forcing a smile as I walked toward the stairs, away from the chest that held so many of my darkest memories. "What are you doing down there?" Emily asked, her gaze drifting past me to the shadowy corners of the basement. "Just checking on something," I said quickly, trying to sound casual. "You shouldn't be down here, Emily. It's not safe." Emily's brow furrowed. "But why? It's just a basement." My smile faltered as I reached out to take her hand. "There are some things you're too young to understand, sweetie. Let's go back upstairs." But she didn't move. Her eyes were locked on the chest in the corner, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. Emily had always been a curious child, much like I was at her age. It was that same curiosity that had led me into trouble all those years ago, and I was determined not to let history repeat itself. "Mom," Emily said slowly, "what's in that chest?" I felt a lump form in my throat. I knew this moment would come eventually, but I had hoped it wouldn't be so soon. Taking a deep breath, I crouched down to Emily's level and looked her in the eyes. "There's something I need to tell you," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "It's a story about when I was your age, a story about a doll, and the danger it brought to our family." Emily's eyes widened with interest, and I could see that there was no turning back now. I had to tell her the truth, no matter how much it scared me. "When I was 6 years old," I started, "I had a twin brother named Benny. We were very close, just like you and your friends. We did everything together, played games, went on adventures, and shared our toys. But there was one toy that was special to me, a doll named Lily." Emily listened intently as I continued, my voice taking on a faraway tone as I recounted the memories that had haunted me for so long. "Lily was a beautiful doll," I said. "She had golden curls, bright blue eyes, and the prettiest pink dress. My father brought her back for me from a business trip, and from the moment I saw her, I was enchanted. She became my constant companion. I took her everywhere, told her all my secrets, and she even slept beside me every night. But," my voice trailed off as I recalled the first signs that something was wrong. "It wasn't long before I started to notice strange things happening. I would leave Lily in one place, and when I came back she would be in another. I thought it was Benny playing tricks on me, but then things got worse." Emily's hand tightened around mine, sensing the fear that had crept into my voice. "What happened, Mom?" I hesitated, the memories threatening to overwhelm me. But I pushed through, knowing I had to tell the whole story. "Lily started to talk to me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "At first, it was just in my dreams. I would hear her voice, soft and sweet, telling me things that only I could hear. But soon, the voice became clearer even when I was awake. She told me what to do, what to say, even when to eat. And I listened." Emily's eyes were wide with fear, but she didn't interrupt. She needed to know what happened next. "One night," I continued, my voice shaking, "Lily told me that Benny was bad. She said he needed to be punished. I was scared and confused, but her voice was so insistent, so commanding, that I couldn't resist. I tried to hurt him. My breath hitched as I remembered that terrible night. The look of fear in Benny's eyes, the way he screamed for our parents as I lunged at him with a pair of scissors, the way our father had to pry me away. It was a memory that had been burned into my mind, one that I had never been able to forget. After that, my parents knew something was wrong, I said, wiping away the tears that had begun to form in my eyes. They took Lily away and locked her in the attic. But even then, I could still hear her voice, calling to me, begging me to let her out. My parents didn't know what to do. They were scared, just like I was. So they called a priest to come and help. The priest performed an exorcism, I explained, my voice steadying as I reached the climax of the story. It was terrifying. The doll, it screamed, it writhed, and the whole house shook like there was an earthquake. But in the end, the priest was able to banish whatever evil was inside Lily. After that, my parents locked her away in the basement, and no one has touched her since. Emily's gaze shifted to the chest in the corner, a look of dread on her face. But she's still down there? Yes, I said, nodding slowly. Lily is still in that chest, and that's why we never go into the basement. It's too dangerous. We can't risk letting her out again. For a long moment, Emily was silent, her eyes fixed on the chest. I could see the fear in her eyes, and I hoped that the story would be enough to keep her away from the basement. I wanted to protect Emily from the same horrors I experienced as a child, to ensure that she would never have to face the same darkness. But I knew that curiosity could be a powerful force, one that was hard to resist, especially for a child. I could only hope that Emily would heed my warning and stay away from the basement. As the days passed, I did my best to return to normal life, putting the memories of Lily and the haunted doll behind me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that a shadow was lurking just out of sight. I noticed that Emily had become quieter, more withdrawn, and often caught her staring off into space, lost in thought. One evening, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard a faint sound coming from the basement. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, like something was knocking against the walls. My heart skipped a beat, and I immediately thought of Lily, but I told myself it was just the house settling, that I was being paranoid. But the tapping continued, growing louder with each passing moment. My hands began to tremble as I set down the knife I was using and wiped my hands on a towel. I knew I had to check to make sure that everything was as it should be. I made my way to the basement door, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the door, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I didn't want to go down there, didn't want to face whatever was making that sound, but I knew I had to for Emily's sake. With a deep breath, I opened the door and descended the creaky stairs into the basement. The air was cold and damp, and the shadows seemed to shift and move as I made my way down. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I froze. The chest was open. The cloth that had covered it was thrown aside, and the lid was ajar, revealing the dark interior. My heart raced as I stepped closer, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I peered into the chest, praying that it was empty. But it wasn't. Lily was gone. Panic surged through me as I realized what had happened. The doll had been released, and there was only one person who could have done it. "Emily!" I cried, rushing back up the stairs. I searched the house frantically, calling out her name, but there was no response. The house was eerily quiet, the only sound being the pounding of my own heart in my ears. Finally, I found Emily in her room, sitting on the floor with her back to the door. My breath caught in my throat as I saw what was in her hands. It was Lily, her golden curls as pristine as ever, her blue eyes gleaming with a malevolence I knew all too well. "Emily," I whispered, stepping into the room, my voice trembling with fear. "What have you done?" Emily didn't answer. She just sat there, cradling the doll in her arms, her eyes distant and glazed over. I could feel the darkness in the room, a suffocating presence that seemed to press in on me from all sides. "Emily, listen to me," I pleaded, reaching out to her. "You need to put the doll down. She's dangerous. Please, Emily." But Emily just smiled, a chilling, unnatural smile that sent a wave of terror through me. And then, in a voice that wasn't her own, she spoke. "Mommy," the voice whispered, cold and cruel. "Lily missed you." I felt the blood drain from my face as the reality of the situation hit me. Lily was back, and she had taken control of my daughter. The nightmare I had tried so hard to escape had returned, more terrifying than ever. And I knew, in that moment, that I would have to fight to save Emily from the same darkness that had nearly consumed me all those years ago. But this time, I wasn't sure if I would succeed. The evil that lurked within Lily was stronger now, more cunning, and it had found a new vessel in my innocent daughter. As I stood there, frozen with fear, I realized that the battle was just beginning, and I would do anything, to protect my daughter from the curse that had haunted our family for so long. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late. I stood in that room staring at Emily, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The sight of her holding Lily, with that unnatural smile, was almost too much to bear. My little girl, my sweet Emily, was being used by something evil, something that I had tried so hard to bury in the past. I knew I had to act quickly, but my mind was racing. What could I do? The priest who had exorcised Lily all those years ago was long gone, and I had no idea how to deal with this on my own. But one thing was certain. I couldn't let this go on. I had to save Emily, no matter the cost. "Emily," I said, my voice steady but filled with urgency. "We need to put Lily back in the chest. She doesn't belong here." Emily's eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw a flicker of recognition, a trace of my daughter's true self fighting to break free. But then Lily's grip on her tightened, and that malevolent smile returned. "No, Mommy," the voice said, twisting my daughter's sweet tone into something grotesque. "Lily wants to stay. She's happy here. Aren't you happy to see her?" Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized how deep Lily's influence had already sunk into Emily. My hands clenched into fists as I fought back the fear threatening to paralyze me. I couldn't afford to lose control, not now. I had to be strong. For Emily, for Benny, for my husband. Suddenly, I heard the front door open and close downstairs. My husband, Mark, was home. Relief washed over me for a brief moment before it was quickly replaced by dread. He had no idea what was happening, and I wasn't sure how he would react to the truth. "Emily, stay here," I said, my voice firm as I took a step back. "I'm going to talk to Daddy. Don't move, okay?" The doll's grip on Emily seemed to tighten, but she nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. I forced myself to turn away and hurried downstairs to meet Mark. He was in the hallway, shrugging off his coat and setting down his briefcase. He smiled when he saw me, but his smile faltered when he noticed the look on my face. "Annie, what's wrong?" he asked, concern lacing his voice. "Mark, we have a problem," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's Emily. She found the doll." Mark's expression turned to confusion, then to worry as he realized what I was talking about. "The doll? You mean that doll?" I nodded, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. "Yes. I told her the story, but I don't know, Mark. I think Lily's taken hold of her, just like she did to me." Mark's face paled as he processed my words. He had always been skeptical about the supernatural, but he had never doubted my fear when it came to Lily. He knew how real it was to me, and now it was happening all over again. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice low and tense. "In her room," I replied. "But Mark, she's not herself. Lily's already started controlling her." Mark took a deep breath, his jaw tightening as he made up his mind. "We need to get that doll away from her, now." I nodded, feeling a surge of resolve. Together, we headed upstairs, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. But as we approached Emily's room, the sound of her singing reached our ears. It was a soft, haunting lullaby, one that I hadn't heard in years, one that I used to sing to Lily. Mark's hand tightened around mine, and I could feel his fear mirroring my own. We reached the door and slowly pushed it open. Emily was sitting on the floor, still cradling Lily in her arms. Her voice was soft and sweet, but there was something chilling about it, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Mark took a step forward, but I held him back, shaking my head. We had to be careful. I knew from experience that Lily could be dangerous, and we couldn't afford to make any mistakes. "Emily," Mark said gently, trying to reach through to our daughter. "Can you come here, sweetheart? We just want to talk." But Emily didn't respond. She just continued to sing, her eyes locked on the doll's glassy blue ones. I felt a cold wave of despair wash over me. How could we reach her when Lily had such a tight grip on her? Mark glanced at me, his eyes full of uncertainty. I knew he was struggling to find a way to break through, just as I was. But then, without warning, he made a decision. He lunged forward, grabbing the doll from Emily's hands. Everything happened so fast. Emily let out a blood-curdling scream, a sound so filled with rage and fear that it made my blood run cold. She lashed out, scratching at Mark's arms as he struggled to keep hold of the doll. The room seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and I could feel the air growing colder. "Annie, get Emily out of here," Mark shouted, his voice strained as he fought to keep the doll away from our daughter. I hesitated, torn between protecting Emily and helping Mark. But I knew he was right. We had to get Emily out of that room, away from Lily's influence. I rushed forward, grabbing Emily by the shoulders. She thrashed and kicked, her screams turning into incoherent shrieks of fury. But I held on, using every ounce of strength I had to drag her out of the room and down the hall. As soon as we were out of the room, I slammed the door shut behind us, blocking out the sounds of the struggle inside. I held Emily close, trying to soothe her, but she was inconsolable. Her eyes were wild, filled with a terror that I recognized all too well. "It's okay, baby," I whispered, rocking her back and forth. "It's going to be okay. We're going to help you, I promise." But even as I said the words, I wasn't sure if I believed them. I could still hear the sounds of Mark's struggle inside the room, and I knew that we were facing something far more powerful than we could handle on our own. Suddenly, the door burst open, and Mark stumbled out, the doll still clutched in his hands. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. "Annie, we need to get out of here," he said, his voice trembling. "Now." I didn't need to be told twice. I scooped Emily up in my arms and hurried down the stairs with Mark close behind. We made our way to the front door, but before we could reach it, a chilling laughter echoed through the house. It was a sound that I hadn't heard in years, a sound that I had hoped never to hear again. It was Lily's laughter, high-pitched and gleeful, filled with the promise of more torment to come. Mark froze, his eyes wide with terror. "Annie, we have to get rid of this doll. We can't let her stay here." But I knew that it wasn't that simple. We had tried to get rid of Lily before, tried to burn her, bury her, even throw her in the river. But no matter what we did, she always came back. And now she was stronger than ever. "We can't destroy her," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But we can lock her away. We can keep her from hurting anyone else." Mark nodded, his grip on the doll tightening. "Then let's do it, but we have to hurry." Together, we rushed to the basement, the cold air biting at our skin as we descended the stairs. The shadows seemed to close in around us, and I could feel Lily's presence growing stronger, more malevolent. We reached the chest, and Mark quickly threw it open. But as he moved to place the doll inside, Emily suddenly broke free from my grasp, her small hands reaching for Lily. "No!" she screamed, her voice filled with a desperation that broke my heart. "Don't take her away. She's mine." Mark struggled to keep the doll out of her reach, but Emily was relentless, her strength fueled by Lily's influence. I grabbed her, pulling her back, but it was like trying to hold on to a wild animal. "Emily, stop!" I cried, tears streaming down my face. "Please, baby, you have to let go." But Emily wasn't listening. She fought with everything she had, her eyes locked on the doll. And then, with a sudden surge of strength, she broke free from my grip and lunged at Mark. Everything happened in a blur. Emily's small hands wrapped around the doll, and for a moment, it felt like time stood still. Then, there was a flash of blinding light, followed by a deafening silence. When I opened my eyes, Mark was lying on the floor, motionless. The doll was still clutched in his hands, its eyes now dull and lifeless. And Emily was standing over him, her face pale and expressionless. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice small and trembling. "What happened?" I rushed to Mark's side, my heart pounding in my chest. But as soon as I touched him, I knew. He was gone. The life had been drained from him, his body cold and still. "No," I gasped, my voice breaking as the reality of what had happened hit me. "No, no, no." Emily stood there, tears welling up in her eyes as she watched me. "Mommy, is he?" I couldn't answer. I couldn't find the words. All I could do was hold Mark's lifeless body. My heart shattered into a million pieces, and in that moment, I realized the truth. Lily had won. She had taken everything from me. My childhood, my brother, and now my husband. And there was nothing I could do to stop her. But as I held Mark in my arms, I made a silent vow. I would protect Emily no matter what. I would find a way to keep Lily from hurting her, even if it meant sacrificing everything I had left. I slowly got to my feet, my body trembling with grief and rage. I picked up the doll, its cold, lifeless eyes staring back at me, and placed it in the chest. I slammed the lid shut, sealing Lily away once again. But this time I knew it wouldn't be enough. The darkness was still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. And I would have to be ready, for Emily's sake. As I carried her back upstairs, I could feel the weight of the past pressing down on me. The nightmare that had haunted me for so long was far from over. But I would fight with everything I had to keep my daughter safe, to break the curse that had destroyed our family. And as I locked the basement door behind me, I knew that the battle was just beginning.